the so-called big vent. Want to briefly touch on the booster history here, and this will be quite brief since this is just the third launch of Falcon 9 first stage booster, tail number 1086 in the SpaceX fleet. Its first outing came back as a side booster, actually, for a Falcon Heavy launch of the GOES-U satellite back on June 25th. It should actually be 2024, not 2022. Slight typo there. That was followed up on December 8th by the launch of a batch of Starlink satellites. And that, of course, brings us to today, the next launch of Starlink satellites on board this Falcon 9 rocket, T-minus 20 minutes, 47 seconds and counting. Again, the big vent happens earlier here at pad 39A, so should really start to see it get in full swing in about 5 seconds. There you see the big vent. We see this visually come up as SpaceX is chilling the feed lines prior to second stage liquid oxygen load. It's also a good visual indication that fueling remains on time. Now, time T minus 15 minutes, 38 seconds and counting. The big vent has wrapped up, as you can see. Just a little bit of tapering off there from the strong back. SpaceX now loading that liquid oxygen on board the Falcon 9's second stage. 10 T minus 13 minutes, 26 seconds and counting. Want to thank the more than 6,300 of you who are joining with us live as we're getting ready to see this Falcon 9 rocket lift off from Historic Launch Complex 39A. If you haven't already, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button for us. Allows more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage in the time remaining. Also want to thank channel member Glenn A for a $2 super chat. Really appreciate that, Glenn. As we're getting ready to see the departure of the third Falcon 9 rocket of the year, let's go ahead and talk about SpaceX's workhorse vehicle, the Falcon 9. Stands at a height of 70 meters or 229 feet tall, has diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. The majority of that is made up by the Falcon 9's first stage, bottom two-thirds of the rocket. As we mentioned, with this particular booster, it has flown twice before, looking for its third launch today. Tail number 1086 in the SpaceX fleet. At the base, the first stage are 9 Merlin engines, which burn a rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust. Around the engine compartment are black carbon fiber landing legs that will be used to land the first stage on the drone ship. Today, SpaceX is using the drone ship called a shortfall of gravitas. Above the first stage is the inner stage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core, which is surrounded by carbon fiber. In the image on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it comes back through the atmosphere, tail first like a big old dart towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are three mechanical latches that attach to the second stage. And that first stage main engine cutoff, high pressure helium is used to release those latches, and four pneumatic pushers ensure clean separation. Also, the second stage engine nozzle is safely housed inside the interstage adapter until stage separation. Speaking of the second stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9, powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine, or an MVAC engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, hence the name. It produces more than 220,500 pounds of thrust, and will be fired twice on today's flight, placing the 21 Starlink satellites into their intended orbit. Same as the first stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 also burns RP-1 and LOX. Following deployment of the Starlink satellites, a little more than an hour and 5 minutes after a liftoff, the upper stage will perform a brief deorbit burn, helping to drive the upper stage back into the atmosphere where it will burn up, helping to eliminate the risk of creating any unnecessary space debris on this mission. Finally, at the top of the Falcon 9 stack are the payload fairings, which encapsulate the 21 Starlink satellites. The fairings are made up of a carbon composite material, which is 13.1 meters or 43 feet tall, 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. The fairing halves will be recovered a little further downrange from where the first stage lands on the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas. They gently splash down under the support of parachutes. SpaceX will then recover the fairing halves, bring them back into port, where they will be refurbished and plan to be turned around for future use. SpaceX is working to certify both its first stage boosters as well as its payload fairings for up to 40 flights each. I believe the last count that SpaceX publicized about its payload fairings is that they had notched up to 22 flights, I believe, in total. The most flown first stage booster remains B-1067, which launched at the beginning of December most recently on its 24th launch and landing. Time now T-minus 8 minutes and counting. We're just about a minute away from the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket, where they will flow a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, helping to protect them from the risk of thermal shock and damage during the startup sequence. Time now T-minus 6 minutes, 19 seconds and counting. At this point, SpaceX is just about done fueling or loading RP-1 on board the Falcon 9's first stage. That should be wrapping up here in the next few seconds. As we're now within the last 6 minutes of the count, we've got now a little more than 10,000 of you joining with us live. Let's go ahead and talk about where this Falcon 9 rocket will be flying once it leaves the pad. Let's talk a little trajectory, shall we? Before we peek over there, notice a few folks are starting to gather on the press lawn. It's been a minute since we've had a string of daylight Falcon launches. Obviously, a nice opportunity for folks to pop away from work and enjoy a liftoff from here at the Kennedy Space Center before heading back to their normal day jobs. Once this Falcon 9 does clear the pad, it will be flying in a southeasterly trajectory, heading away from Launch Complex 39A here at, as NASA would say, world's premier spaceport. Falcon 9 rocket will follow that green arc. First stage booster, though, will break off and follow that red path you see there and set up a landing on the drone ship called a short fall of gravitas. Positioned in the Atlantic Ocean. If successful, this will be the 93rd booster landing for that particular drone ship and the 393rd booster landing to date. SpaceX is also aiming to recover the payload fairings, as we mentioned, which splashed down under the support of parachutes, put on a recovery vessel, and will be brought back into port.
Strong back retract sequence has started.
As you just heard, the strong back retract getting underway, getting some pad level views and mission audio from SpaceX. As you may recall, they seem to be having some audio issues during Monday's launch, which is why we weren't able to bring you mission audio then, but we thankfully are getting it today. So we will do our level best to not talk over the callouts as they happen. As you can see, though, the clamp arms beneath the payload fairings have opened up, and the strong back will pull away a few degrees from the Falcon 9 rocket, stay in that position until liftoff. Also, just a quick bit of housekeeping here. You'll notice the clock in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, different than what you're seeing from the SpaceX feed currently in the big box. Reason for that is our clock is in real time. What's coming in from SpaceX is on a slight delay, so we'll be making our callouts based on the real-time clock as long as we have ground-level views of the Falcon 9 rocket.
Stage 1 lock slot is complete.
Good call from SpaceX. We are now just awaiting a similar call for the Falcon 9's second stage, the conclusion of second stage liquid oxygen loading. At that point, the Falcon 9 rocket will be fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. They should be ticking that fueling box here right about now. Less than 30 seconds, we'll see some additional venting from the strong back. Those are the ground gas closeouts starting here in about 20-ish seconds. There you see ground gas closeouts now underway. As you just heard, stage 2 lock load is complete. Again, the SpaceX feed and the callouts from there coming in on a slight delay. So that's why you're hearing a little bit of discrepancy.
Gas closeouts.
With that call, we're just about a minute away from the launch of the Falcon 9 rocket, SpaceX's third orbital flight of the year. We'll come back to the live chat on the other side of liftoff, but for now, we'll focus on the vehicle as we're T-minus 1 minute and counting. In the next several seconds, we should be hearing a call that the Falcon 9 is in startup.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
Good call. Now just awaiting the SpaceX launch director to give their go for launch. Standing by for that in just a few seconds.
Launch director, go for launch.
And with that, we are now less than 30 seconds away in real time from the liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket, carrying on board 21 Starlink satellites, lifting off in 18 seconds. And here we go. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 12-11 flight. Falcon 9 has cleared the tower. Falcon 9 about a minute plus into flight. SpaceX will soon be throttling down the engines as it approaches max Q at the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Some great work by our tracking team today. Good call for max Q. SpaceX will, in the next several seconds, begin thermal conditioning and the chill down of the Merlin vacuum engine. That'll prepare them for a few events in fairly rapid succession. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, about T plus 2 minutes and 26 seconds. That'll be followed by stage separation, the ignition of that Merlin vacuum engine, and then fairing deployment just after the 3-minute mark. Coming up on MECO here in real time. Unfortunately, the rocket has gone into the cloud, so it's hard to see from our tracking cameras, but we should hear the call out from SpaceX momentarily.
Main engine cutoff.
Stage separation confirmed.
And back ignition.
All good calls from SpaceX. Here in real time, we're about 6 seconds from payload fairing deployment. Our cameras are still scanning the skies to see if we can reacquire a visual on that. See the hypersonic grid fins deploying on the Falcon 9's first stage there in the box on the left-hand side of your screen.
Fairing separation confirmed.
Good call, good visuals. Those 21 Starlink satellites now exposed to the vacuum of space for the first time on this mission. You can see one of those fairing halves just off the side of the engine nozzle from this camera vantage point. Once again, these fairing halves will splash down in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of parachutes. And a recovery vessel will scoop them up and bring them back into port for refurbishment and reuse. Now 4 minutes into flight in real time. You could see the cloud layer beneath both the upper stage and the booster What that means for us on the ground is it's not a very easy tracking day, so unfortunately we probably won't be able to reacquire ground level tracking of the Falcon 9 rocket, though we are still scanning the skies for that. If we are able to see it again, we'll be sure to bring those pictures to you. The next the next post liftoff milestone that we're looking for here is the start of the first stage entry burn. Lasting about 25 seconds in duration, SpaceX will ignite 3 of the Merlin engines at the base of the Falcon 9 first stage, helping to slow the vehicle down dramatically as it continues to make its way towards the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas. Now 5 minutes into flight in real time. Those bursts you're seeing on the booster, those are the cold gas thrusters helping the first stage booster B1086 adjust its attitude or its positioning. Let's now look up through the inner stage at the top of the first stage booster. Now coming up on T plus 6 minutes.
Stage 1 FTS has safed.
And counting.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
Good call for the start of entry burn. See that visual there on the left-hand side of your screen. You also heard the call that the Stage 1 FTS or flight termination system has been safed. It is no longer needed at this point in the flight.
Stage 1 entry burn start down.
With the conclusion of that entry burn, we are now waiting the start of the first stage landing burn. That should start around
Stage 2
T
FTS has safed.
plus 7 minutes and 43 seconds, allowing for a safe touchdown on the drone ship.
Stage 1 transonic. Stage 1 landing burn.
Good call for the start of landing burn. We should see drone ship level views coming up on the right-hand side of your screen momentarily.
Stage 2 terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And against a beautiful, just lightly cloudy sky, a good touchdown of B1086 on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas.
Impact shutdown.
Nominal orbit insertion.
Good call outs from SpaceX. The upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket now entering into that parking orbit where it will remain in that coast phase till about T plus 53 minutes and 57 seconds. There will then be a brief 2-second burn to help circularize the orbit. Then the Starlink satellites will be deployed at T plus 1 hour, 5 minutes, and 6 seconds. SpaceX will issue confirmation of that through its social channels. Before we get to our mission stats as they currently stand, I want to thank a few more folks for their support during this live coverage. Michael McLeod with a very generous $20 super chat, one of our channel members, saying, really appreciate you guys. Thank you. Well, thank you, Michael, for your support, especially at that level. Andy, back with another 10-pound super chat. Appreciate you, Andy. He says, question for everyone. Given the chance to do a low orbit space flight lasting 5 minutes, you're allowed to play one piece of music during that flight. What song would you choose? I'll let the live chat muse on that as we continue on. Jamie Walton with a $2 super chat asking which pieces of the rocket are not reused. Those would be the upper stage for the Falcon 9 rocket in particular. So SpaceX uses a brand new upper stage every time they have a Falcon 9 launch, which will give you an idea of their rate of manufacturing and production for the second stages, how much they need to crank out to support launches roughly every 2.5 days on average these days. And thanks to Space Q for a $5 super chat. And Infinity with a €2 super chat. Sounded like they're getting ready for lunchtime. Hankering for some noodles. Speaking of hankering, hungry for some mission stats. So let's go ahead and turn to that now as we begin to close out our live coverage here of the Starlink 12-11 mission. With a good liftoff and landing of the first stage booster, that marked flight number 3 for B-1086. This was SpaceX's 420th Falcon 9 launch to date, the third of 2025 so far. This was SpaceX's 364th Falcon booster reflight, the launch of a booster that has flown at least once. There will be a little repetitiveness with some of the stats here as we're still very early on in the year, but of course this was SpaceX's third orbital launch of 2025 as well. All of them so far from Florida, though they are gearing up for, as early as tomorrow, launch for the National Reconnaissance Office from out of Vandenberg. This was the 99th orbital launch for SpaceX from Pad 39A and the 193rd overall orbital launch from this pad. It's just a point of note, if there's not another launch in between this one and the mission launching Firefly's Blue Ghost lunar lander and iSpace's Hakuto R Mission 2 lander, that flight bound for the moon with those two companies will be SpaceX's 100th orbital launch from Pad 39A. Here's where the bar chart now stands, taking a look from SpaceX's launch history up to the present day. Moving on to some recovery stats. This was the 93rd booster landing successfully on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas. That marked the 313th drone ship landing for SpaceX and the 393rd overall booster landing to date. Finally, with some industry stats on the year, this very young year so far, this was the third orbital launch from Florida, the third orbital launch from U.S. soil, the third from a U.S. rocket company, and the fourth orbital launch attempt from around the world, including a Long March 3B mission from China. Fortunately, no launch failures so far. Here's where the pie chart now stands. U.S. stands at 3, China at 1. Everyone else looking to get on the board as the year goes on. And as our day goes on, we're going to go ahead and bid you all adieu. Want to thank our friends Pete Carstens with Max Q Productions, Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images for their support in tracking this Falcon 9 rocket. Once again, just as a reminder, you can always head over to our website, spaceflightnow.com, click on the launch schedule tab at the top of the page, and you can get an idea of all the launches that are coming up here, orbital launches, I should specify. Also, looking towards Blue Origin's New Glenn inaugural flight coming up here at the end of the week. First chance for launch, Friday, January 10th, 1 a.m. Eastern, 0600 UTC. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, ring that bell, do all the things, and you will ensure that you won't miss the start of our live launch coverage with that mission. I see the strong back coming up here at the pad, as I want to thank our photographer, Adam Bernstein, being out here to track the rocket as well as do some still photography. You can follow him on X, Apron NYC. Michael Kane, our other photographer, at MD Kane Jr. I want to thank our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast. Thanks to our moderators in the live chat, Aussie Space Girl, Callisti Lee, for holding it down. Starting to get kind of late there in Australia, so we'll go ahead and let Aussie Space Girl head on out the digital door. Give the last word to Charles Baxter with a $10 super chat saying thank you, Spaceflight Now. And I'll put that thank you right back to you for wherever you are watching this live launch from, you dear viewer. We appreciate you being with us for a live launch coverage, and we're very excited to do it all over again with you in the very near future. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.